The morning sun hadn't yet peeked over the horizon when Jack Harper unlocked the front door of Harper's coffee shop. The familiar scent of freshly ground beans welcomed him as he flipped on the lights, illuminating the warm wooden interior. His movements were precise and practiced, the result of years spent in the same morning routine. He started the first pot of coffee brewing, its rich aroma filling the small space. The quiet moments before opening were his favorite part of the day. Just him and the gentle hum of the machines, a peace he'd learned to appreciate. The clock on the wall read 5:45 a.m. when Mrs. Peterson, a retired schoolteacher, knocked gently on the glass door. Jack smiled and waved her in, already reaching for her usual mug, the blue one with tiny flowers that he kept reserved just for her. "Morning, Jack," she said, settling onto her favorite stool at the counter. "Smells wonderful in here." "Morning, Mrs. Peterson. The usual?" His voice was warm but measured, like someone used to keeping parts of himself hidden away. She nodded, pulling out her crossword puzzle. "You know me too well." As Jack prepared her cappuccino, more regulars filtered in. Tom from the post office grabbed his black coffee to go. A group of teachers from the high school huddled around their usual table, sharing lesson plans and friendly gossip. The bell above the door chimed again, and Jack looked up to see Lily, his 16-year-old daughter, shuffling in. Her backpack hung heavy on one shoulder, and her long brown hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. Despite the early hour, she managed a sleepy smile. "Morning, Dad," she yawned, dropping her bag behind the counter. "Morning, sweetheart. Sleep okay?" Jack handed her a hot chocolate, their morning ritual. Mm-hmm. Lily took a sip and moved to help with the pastry case, carefully arranging muffins and croissants just the way her father had taught her. She'd been helping in the shop since she was tall enough to reach the counter, and they worked together with an easy familiarity. "Mr. Harper," called out Bill Jensen, one of the regular customers. "I was telling my brother about your coffee shop. He's ex-military, like yourself, right?" Jack's hands stilled briefly as he wiped down the counter. "Oh, I wouldn't know much about that," he said quietly, his usual deflection smooth and practiced. "But your brother's welcome any time." Lily glanced at her father, catching the slight tension in his shoulders. She'd seen it before, that careful way he had of stepping around questions about his past. Her eyes drifted to the corner where an American flag hung in its triangular display case, partially hidden in shadow. Sometimes she caught her father looking at it when he thought no one was watching. The morning rush began to pick up. Jack moved efficiently behind the counter, calling out orders and making change. His movements were precise, almost military in their accuracy, though few would notice such a detail. To most customers, he was simply Jack, the friendly coffee shop owner who remembered their orders and asked about their families. "Dad," Lily said, checking her phone, "I should head to school. Quiz first period." Jack paused in his work to give her a quick hug. "Good luck, sweetheart. You studied hard for this one." "Thanks." She grabbed her backpack and headed for the door, turning back briefly. "Love you, Dad." "Love you too," he called after her, watching until she disappeared around the corner. The shop quieted as the morning rush tapered off. Jack found himself alone behind the counter, the regulars either gone or absorbed in their own activities. His hand slipped into his pocket, finding the familiar shape of the coin he always carried. He pulled it out, running his thumb over the worn surface where the word Falcon was engraved. The metal was warm from being carried close to his body, smooth from years of worried touches. Jack remembered the day he received it, but quickly pushed the memory aside. Some things were better left in the past, he told himself, even as his chest tightened with unspoken words. The flag in the corner caught his eye, and for a moment, he allowed himself to really look at it. The crisp folds held stories he never told, memories he kept locked away. Not just for his own sake, but for Lily's. She deserved a father who was whole, not one haunted by. The bell above the door jingled, pulling Jack from his thoughts. He quickly slipped the coin back into his pocket, straightened his apron, and turned to greet the new customers with his usual warm smile, all traces of memory carefully hidden away. "Welcome to Harper's," he said, his voice steady and warm. "What can I get for you today?" The mid-morning rush at Harper's coffee shop had settled into its usual comfortable rhythm. Sunlight streamed through the front windows, casting warm patterns across the weathered wooden floors. The familiar hum of conversation and the gentle clink of cups against saucers filled the air. The bell above the door chimed as a group of young soldiers walked in, their crisp uniforms standing out against the cafe's rustic decor. Their laughter and easy banter brought fresh energy to the quiet space. Jack looked up from where he was wiping down the espresso machine, offering them his characteristic warm smile. "Welcome to Harper's," he called out, grabbing a stack of clean cups. "What can I get for you guys?" The soldiers crowded around the counter, their boots squeaking against the floor. They were clearly fresh from training, carrying themselves with that particular mix of pride and eagerness that marked new recruits. "Heard this was the best coffee in town," said one of them, scanning the menu board. "We try our best," Jack replied modestly, reaching for his notepad. His movements were smooth and efficient as he took their orders. 2 lattes, a cappuccino, 3 pastries. The last soldier, a tall young man with close-cropped hair, stepped forward. "Just a tall black coffee for me, sir." Something in the soldier's stance, the way he held himself at parade rest even while ordering coffee, triggered an old memory in Jack. Without thinking, he turned toward the coffee urns and called out in the sharp, clear cadence of his military days, "1 black coffee for Falcon." The words echoed in the sudden silence. Jack froze, his hand still on the coffee pot. Behind him, he heard the sharp intake of breath from several of the soldiers. "Did he just say Falcon?" one of them whispered, voice filled with awe. The sound of boots clicking together in unison broke the quiet. Jack turned slowly, coffee pot still in hand, to find all 5 soldiers standing ramrod straight, right hands raised in crisp salutes. Their faces showed a mixture of shock and reverence. "Sir," the tallest soldier said, maintaining his salute, "we studied your case in training, sir, the Burma extraction. We had no idea you were here." The usual morning chatter in the cafe had died completely. Regular customers set down their newspapers and coffee cups, staring at the scene unfolding before them. At the pastry case, Lily stood motionless, a half-filled display tray forgotten in her hands as she gaped at her father. Jack's face flushed red. He set down the coffee pot with careful precision, trying to keep his hands steady. "At ease," he muttered, the words coming automatically even after all these years. "It's nothing, really." But the soldiers didn't lower their salutes. The one who had spoken continued, his voice carrying clearly through the silent cafe. "Nothing, sir. You're a legend at the academy. What you did that night, saving those civilians—" "Please," Jack cut him off, his voice strained. He gestured vaguely at their still raised hands. "That's not necessary. I'm just a coffee shop owner now." Around the cafe, people were beginning to whisper. Mrs. Chen, who came in every morning for her green tea, leaned over to whisper to Mr. Peterson at the next table. Other customers pulled out their phones, typing rapidly. "But sir," another soldier protested, finally lowering his salute but maintaining his rigid posture, "You're Falcon, the Falcon. Your mission is required reading for all special operations training." Jack busied himself with pouring the black coffee, keeping his eyes down. His movements were mechanical now, lacking their usual easy grace. "That was a long time ago," he said quietly. "Your coffee's on the house today. Thank you for your service." The soldiers remained standing at attention, their respect evident in every line of their bodies. They accepted their drinks with parade ground precision, each one nodding formally to Jack before moving to find seats. They huddled together at a corner table, still stealing odd glances at the counter. Throughout it all, Lily hadn't moved from her spot by the pastry case. Her eyes were wide, fixed on her father as if seeing him for the first time. The half-filled tray still hung forgotten in her hands, the remaining pastries lying untouched beside her. Jack could feel her gaze on him as he wiped down the counter with unnecessary thoroughness. His forced smile felt brittle on his face. When he finally glanced up, meeting his daughter's questioning eyes, he saw confusion, surprise, and something else, a hint of hurt that made his chest tighten. The whispers continued to circulate through the cafe. "Did you know? All this time? The Jack Harper?" The words seemed to bounce off the walls, growing louder with each echo. Jack kept his head down, continuing to clean the already spotless counter. His shoulders tense beneath his coffee-stained apron. The morning sun had climbed higher now, streaming through the windows and catching the dust motes in bright beams. It illuminated the small American flag in its corner, making the carefully folded triangle of fabric seem to glow. In the new silence of the cafe, the gentle tick of the wall clock seemed unusually loud, marking each second as it passed. The kitchen was quiet except for the soft clink of forks against plates. Jack and Lily sat across from each other at their small wooden table, the overhead light casting a warm glow over their simple dinner of spaghetti and meatballs. Lily pushed her food around her plate, stealing glances at her father between bites. "Dad," she finally said, breaking the silence, "why did those soldiers salute you today?" Jack's fork paused halfway to his mouth. He set it down slowly, his expression carefully neutral. "It was nothing, sweetheart. Just a misunderstanding." "But they knew your call sign, Falcon." Lily leaned forward, her brown eyes intense. "I've never heard anyone call you that before." "It was a long time ago." Jack reached for his water glass, taking a long sip. "Another life, really." "Were you some kind of hero?" Lily pressed, her voice rising with excitement. "The way they looked at you." "Lily," Jack's tone was gentle but firm, "the past is the past. What matters is right here, right now. This dinner's getting cold." Lily slumped back in her chair, frustration evident on her face. "You never tell me anything about before. About when Mom was alive, about your time in the military." "Because those stories aren't important anymore." Jack's eyes softened as he looked at his daughter. "What's important is getting you through high school, running the coffee shop, making sure we have food on the table." They finished dinner in silence, the questions hanging heavy between them. Later, after the dishes were done and Jack had retreated to the back porch for his nightly stargazing, Lily lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling. Sleep wouldn't come. The image of those soldiers snapping to attention, the whispers in the cafe, the look on her father's face, it all swirled in her mind. She waited until she was sure her father was still outside, then slipped out of bed. In her sock feet, she crept to the attic access in the hallway. The pull-down ladder creaked slightly as she opened it, making her freeze. But the house remained quiet. The attic was dark and musty. Lily clicked on her phone's flashlight, sweeping it across dusty boxes and old furniture. In the far corner, partially hidden behind a stack of Christmas decorations, she spotted a military footlocker she'd never noticed before. Her heart pounding, Lily made her way over to it. The metal was cool under her fingers as she lifted the lid. Inside, neatly folded uniforms lay beneath a layer of tissue paper. She lifted them carefully, revealing what lay beneath, a wooden box of medals, their ribbons still vibrant despite the years. Next to them, bound with a faded blue ribbon, was a stack of letters. Lily's hands trembled as she untied the ribbon. The paper was soft with age, the handwriting instantly recognizable as her father's. The letter on top was addressed to her mother, Sarah. "My dearest Sarah," she read in the dim light, "the nights here are the hardest. When everything goes quiet, that's when the memories come rushing back. I keep seeing Thompson's face, hearing his voice telling me to go, to leave him behind. I made the call that day, the call that got my best friend killed. They say I saved dozens of lives, that I did the right thing, but how can that be right? How can I deserve these medals they're giving me when he's gone?" Tears blurred Lily's vision. She could almost hear her father's voice speaking the words, could feel the pain and guilt radiating from the page. She wanted to read more, but something stopped her. This was private, raw, a glimpse into a part of her father she'd never known existed. With shaking hands, she carefully retied the ribbon around the letters. She returned everything to its exact place in the footlocker, making sure it looked undisturbed. As she closed the lid, she noticed her father's coin, the one he always carried, had the same emblem as one of the medals. Moving quietly, Lily descended the attic stairs and pushed the ladder back up. Through the window at the end of the hall, she could see her father sitting in his usual spot on the porch. His figure was silhouetted against the night sky, head tilted back to look at the stars. He seemed smaller somehow, weighted down by the secrets he carried. The man who spent his days making lattes and remembering everyone's favorite orders was also a soldier who had faced impossible choices. A hero who couldn't forgive himself. A father who'd been protecting her not just from his past, but from his pain. Outside, Jack continued his quiet vigil under the stars, unaware that his daughter now understood far more than he'd ever wanted her to know. The morning sun streamed through Harper's coffeehouse windows, casting long shadows across the worn wooden floors. Jack stood behind the counter, his movements mechanical as he prepared drinks. But today was different. The usual morning quiet was replaced by whispers and sideways glances. "Is it true you were some kind of war hero?" Mrs. Peterson, a regular customer, leaned over the counter with eager eyes. Jack's jaw tightened. "Just a regular coffee today, Mrs. Peterson?" "Oh, come on, Jack. Those soldiers yesterday, they treated you like you were somebody important." "Your usual vanilla latte," Jack said firmly, sliding her drink across the counter. His expression made it clear the conversation was over. But it wasn't just Mrs. Peterson. Throughout the morning, customers peppered him with questions. Each time, Jack deflected, his shoulders growing more tense by the hour. Around 10, the bell above the door chimed. A man in his 30s entered, carrying a leather messenger bag and a notebook. He approached the counter with purpose, studying Jack intently. "Mr. Harper, I'm David Klein from the Herald." He extended his hand. "I heard about what happened yesterday with the soldiers, and I think your story needs to be told." Jack didn't take the offered hand. "Nothing to tell. What can I get you?" David wasn't deterred. "Those soldiers recognized your call sign. Falcon, right? That must mean something pretty significant." "Look," Jack's voice was low but firm. "I serve coffee. That's it. No story here." From her corner booth where she was doing homework, Lily watched the exchange, her history textbook forgotten. She'd never seen her father look so cornered. David took a seat at the counter, ordering a black coffee. "You know, Mr. Harper, stories like yours matter. They inspire people, help them understand what service and sacrifice really mean." "You don't know anything about sacrifice," Jack snapped, then immediately looked ashamed at his outburst. The cafe had gone quiet, customers pretending not to listen. Lily closed her textbook, unable to concentrate. Pride and worry warred in her chest as she watched her father's hands shake slightly while making David's coffee. The journalist stayed for hours, ordering refill after refill. He chatted with other customers, scribbling in his notebook. Jack grew increasingly agitated, his movements sharp and frustrated. When closing time finally came, David left his card on the counter. "Think about it, Mr. Harper. People deserve to know about real heroes." Jack crumpled the card the moment the door closed behind him. The drive home was tense. Lily couldn't hold back anymore. "Dad, why won't you talk about it? Those soldiers looked at you like you were important." "I'm important right here, right now, taking care of you," Jack replied, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "The past is the past." "But it's my past, too," Lily's voice rose. "Mom's letters are up there in that box. Don't I deserve to know who my father really is?" Jack's head snapped toward her. "You went through my things?" "Because you never tell me anything," Lily shouted as they pulled into their driveway. "I had to find out from strangers that my dad was some kind of hero." "I am not a hero!" Jack's voice thundered through the car. Lily flinched, having never heard him yell before. "Heroes don't—" He cut himself off, getting out of the car and slamming the door. Lily followed him into the house, tears streaming down her face. "Don't what, Dad? What are you so afraid of?" "Some things are better left buried, Lily. End of discussion." Jack headed for the stairs. "Mom would have wanted me to know," Lily called after him. Jack froze, then continued up the stairs without responding. Lily heard him climbing to the attic. She waited a few minutes, then quietly followed, stopping halfway up the attic stairs. Through the gap in the door, she could see her father kneeling beside the old box. His hands trembled as he lifted out medals, running his fingers over the ribbons. A silver star, a purple heart, commendations she didn't understand. Then his shoulders began to shake. With a sudden movement, he slammed the box shut, the sound echoing through the quiet house. Lily stood frozen on the stairs, her heart breaking for the father she thought she knew, and the man she was just beginning to discover. The high school auditorium buzzed with quiet anticipation. Rows of students filled the wooden seats, their usual chatter subdued by the presence of several veterans in dress uniforms seated on the stage. Jack Harper sat among them, tugging uncomfortably at his collar. He hadn't worn his uniform in years, but Lily had insisted, even helping him press it the night before. Principal Sanders approached the podium. "Today, we're honored to have several local veterans share their experiences of service and sacrifice." Her eyes found Jack in the lineup, including Mr. Harper, whom many of you know from his coffee shop downtown. Scattered whispers rippled through the crowd. In the third row, Lily sat up straighter, her eyes fixed on her father. Jack's hands gripped his knees as he waited his turn, listening as other veterans spoke of overseas deployments and battlefield courage. When Jack's name was called, he rose slowly. His boots clicked against the hardwood as he approached the podium. The familiar weight of his uniform brought back memories he'd tried so hard to forget. But looking out at the sea of young faces, especially Lily's encouraging smile, something shifted inside him. "I'm not here to talk about war," he began softly, his voice gaining strength. "War isn't something to glorify. What I want to share is what I learned about faith when everything else was stripped away." The auditorium fell silent. Even the restless students stilled. In the darkest moments, I witnessed incredible acts of compassion. Soldiers sharing their last water with civilian children. Medics working through exhaustion to save lives, friend and foe alike. That's what service really means. It's not about medals or glory. It's about choosing to help others, even when it costs you everything. Jack's gaze found Lily, who was wiping tears from her cheeks. I served with men and women who exemplified this daily. One in particular, his voice caught slightly, Captain Daniel Miller, taught me that true courage isn't about being fearless. It's about being scared but moving forward anyway, especially when others need you. As Jack spoke, other veterans nodded in recognition. Their shared understanding filled the space with unspoken emotion. The greatest honor of my service wasn't any award. It was standing alongside people who believed in something bigger than themselves, who showed up every day for each other, who sacrificed without hesitation. When Jack finished, the applause was gentle but heartfelt. Several veterans approached him afterward, clasping his hand firmly. "Been too long, Falcon," one said quietly. "We should get together more often." That conversation sparked something. Over the next few weeks, Harper's Coffee House became a natural gathering place for local veterans. They'd arrive early, claiming the corner tables, sharing stories and coffee. Jack found himself drawn into their circles, surprised by how natural it felt to connect with others who understood. One morning, as Jack wiped down tables, he paused at the empty wall near the entrance. "What do you think about starting something here?" he asked Lily, who was restocking sugar packets nearby. "A place to remember?" Lily's eyes lit up. "A wall of honor?" Together, they worked through the weekend. Jack installed simple wooden shelves and picture frames. Lily created a hand-painted sign that read, "In honor of those who served." Word spread quickly, and soon veterans and families began bringing in photos. Young faces in uniform, proud group shots, moments frozen in time. The following Friday evening, after closing, Jack stood before the wall with a single frame in his hands. The photograph inside showed two young soldiers, arms around each other's shoulders, grinning beneath the desert sun. Jack looked so much younger, his face unlined by grief. Beside him, Captain Miller beamed with characteristic warmth. Lily appeared at his side, gently taking the frame. "He had kind eyes," she said softly. "The kindest," Jack agreed, his voice rough. "Your mother always said he could light up a room just by walking into it." Lily stood on tiptoe, carefully hanging the photo in the center of the wall. When she stepped back, she wrapped her arms around her father's waist, pressing her cheek against his chest. Jack held her close, his eyes fixed on Miller's smiling face. A faint smile crossed Jack's features, though the shadows of old pain still lingered in his gaze. He stood there with his daughter, surrounded by the faces of heroes, some gone, some still here, each frame telling its own story of service, sacrifice, and the enduring power of memory. The town square hummed with life on Veterans Day. Red, white, and blue bunting draped the gazebo, and flags fluttered in the crisp November breeze. Children wrapped in puffy coats clutched tiny American flags, their breaths visible in the cold air. Families huddled together on folding chairs, thermoses of hot coffee passing from hand to hand. Jack Harper stood behind the gazebo, his fingers trembling as he smoothed the wrinkles from his speech notes. The familiar weight of his dress uniform felt both comforting and strange, like greeting an old friend who had changed over the years. "Dad?" Lily appeared beside him, her cheeks pink from the cold. "You're going to do great." She straightened his medals with gentle fingers, just as her mother used to do. "I'm not sure about this, sweetheart." Jack's voice was barely a whisper. "Maybe someone else should—" "No," Lily's tone was firm. "These people need to hear your story, not for your sake, but for theirs." Mayor Thompson's voice boomed through the speakers. "And now, I'd like to introduce someone many of you know as the owner of Harper's Coffee House, but today we honor him as Captain Jack Falcon Harper. Jack climbed the gazebo steps, his polished shoes clicking against the wood. The crowd's applause felt distant, underwater. He caught glimpses of familiar faces, his regular customers, the young soldiers who had recognized him that fateful morning, veterans he'd come to know through the wall of honor at his cafe. At the podium, Jack cleared his throat. The papers in his hands shook until he set them down, deciding to speak from his heart instead. "Thank you all for coming today," he began, his voice growing stronger with each word. "But I'm not here to talk about medals or missions. I'm here to talk about the quiet heroes, the ones who never made it home." The square fell silent, except for the whisper of the wind through the flags. I served with men and women who showed me what true courage looks like, not in dramatic moments of glory, but in small acts of kindness. Jack's eyes found Lily in the crowd. Like Private Williams, who gave his last chocolate bar to a frightened child, or Lieutenant Rodriguez, who read letters from home to a wounded soldier until help arrived. The young soldiers who had visited his cafe stood at attention near the front, their faces solemn and respectful. But there was one man who taught me more about leadership and faith than any other, Captain Daniel Miller. Jack's voice caught slightly. In our darkest moments, he reminded us that hope isn't about waiting for the storm to pass. It's about learning to dance in the rain. Tears glistened in many eyes now. An elderly veteran nodded slowly, understanding etched in the lines of his face. Miller believed that true strength isn't measured by how many battles you win, but by how many lives you touch. Jack paused, memories washing over him. He carried pictures of every soldier in his unit, said we were all his family. Lily beamed up at her father, pride shining through her tears. The wall she'd felt between them for so long was finally crumbling. Today, we honor all who served, but more importantly, we remember those who gave everything for their country, their comrades, their beliefs. Jack gestured to the flags waving gently in the breeze. They are the real heroes. I stand here only because of their sacrifice. The applause started softly, then swelled like a wave. People rose to their feet, their clapping echoing across the square. The young soldiers saluted sharply. Lily wiped her eyes, her smile radiant. For a moment, Jack felt lighter than he had in years. The guilt that had weighed him down began to lift, replaced by a glimmer of peace. Then a harsh voice cut through the applause. "Liar!" The crowd parted. A man in a weathered military jacket stalked forward, his face twisted with anger. Jack recognized him immediately. Sergeant Collins, his hands balled into fists at his sides. "You stand there talking about sacrifice?" Collins spat the words. "You're nothing but a coward, Harper. Tell them the truth about what happened to Miller." The square fell deathly quiet. Jack gripped the podium, his knuckles white. "You left him behind," Collins shouted, his voice raw with pain. "Our captain died because of you, and you have the nerve to speak his name?" Gasps rippled through the crowd. Lily's face drained of color as she stared up at her father, confusion and hurt replacing her pride. Jack stood frozen at the podium, the weight of all eyes upon him. The medals on his chest felt suddenly heavy, like stones. His mouth opened, but no words came. The proud moment shattered like glass, leaving only the sharp edges of an unspoken truth. The flags continued to wave in the November wind, their gentle rustling the only sound in the stunned silence. The cafe's windows reflected the dim glow of street lamps as night settled over the small town. Inside Harper's Coffee House, the usual warmth had vanished, replaced by a heavy stillness that seemed to press against the walls. Only 3 customers occupied the tables that normally buzzed with conversation, an elderly couple in the corner and a businessman typing quietly on his laptop. Jack moved mechanically behind the counter, his movements lacking their usual purpose. His shoulders hunched forward as if carrying an invisible burden, and his eyes remained fixed on the tasks before him, avoiding the concerned glances from the few remaining regulars. The coffee machine's soft hum felt too loud in the uncomfortable quiet. Lily sat at the counter, her algebra textbook open but untouched. Her fingers traced abstract patterns on the smooth surface as she gathered her courage. The afternoon's events played over and over in her mind. Colin's angry voice, the shocked faces in the crowd, her father's frozen stance at the podium. The pride she'd felt just moments before had crumbled into a mess of confusion and hurt. "Dad," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Is it true? What Sergeant Colin said?" Jack's hand stilled over the coffee grinder. The muscles in his jaw tightened, and for a moment he seemed to age years before her eyes. But no words came. He simply turned away, busying himself with wiping down an already clean coffee machine. Lily's throat tightened. "Please, Dad, I need to know." The silence stretched between them like a wall. Jack's continued refusal to speak felt like a physical pain in Lily's chest. She slammed her textbook shut, the sound sharp in the quiet cafe. The elderly couple looked up, startled. "Fine," she said, shoving her book into her backpack. "Keep your secrets. I guess I don't deserve the truth either." She stormed out, the bell above the door jangling harshly. Jack's hand gripped the counter until his knuckles turned white, but he didn't call after her. The next few days passed in a blur of avoided conversations and empty spaces. Jack began closing the cafe at 4 instead of 7, putting up a handwritten sign with the new hours. Regular customers who'd once lingered for hours now grabbed their coffee to go, sensing the change in atmosphere. The comfortable chatter that had filled the space was replaced by whispered conversations and furtive glances. The wall of honor, once a source of pride, stood neglected in the corner. A thin film of dust gathered on the frames, and the pictures seemed to fade in the weak autumn light. Jack couldn't bring himself to look at them anymore, especially the photo of himself and Captain Miller, their arms around each other's shoulders, young faces grinning at the camera without knowledge of what lay ahead. At home, Lily retreated to her room most evenings. The sound of her door closing felt like an accusation. Their shared dinners, once filled with easy conversation and laughter, became silent affairs lasting barely 10 minutes. Jack watched his daughter push food around her plate, wanting to explain but finding no words adequate enough to bridge the growing gap between them. Late one evening, after another day of sparse customers and heavy silence, Jack stood alone in his darkened cafe. The street outside was empty, and the only sound was the quiet hum of the refrigerator. He moved slowly through the familiar space, his fingers trailing along the counter where he'd served thousands of cups of coffee, shared countless conversations, and built a life he thought would be enough. The memories of that fateful mission crashed over him like waves, the explosion, the screams, Captain Miller's voice on the radio growing weaker. Jack had replayed those moments countless times over the years, examining every decision, every second. Could he have done something different? Should he have, reaching into his pocket? Jack pulled out the worn coin he always carried. The word Falcon caught the dim light, the engraving smooth from years of worried touches. He placed it on the counter with a soft clink that seemed to echo in the empty cafe. "Maybe he was right," Jack whispered to the darkness, his voice rough with unshed tears. The coin lay there, a small circle of silver in the shadows, carrying the weight of guilt, regret, and unspoken truths. Above it, the dusty frames of the Wall of Honor stood as silent witnesses to a past that refused to stay buried, and a present that threatened to crumble beneath its weight. The knock echoed through the quiet house like a thunderclap. Jack stood frozen in the kitchen, his coffee gone cold in his hands. Through the window, the evening sky had turned a deep purple, making the porch light's warm glow even more noticeable. "I'll get it," Lily called from the living room, her footsteps padding across the hardwood floors. When she opened the door, Mrs. Evelyn Miller stood on their front porch, elegant even in her simple navy dress. Her silver hair caught the porch light, creating a gentle halo effect. In her arms, she cradled a wooden box tied with a faded ribbon. "Good evening, Lily," Mrs. Miller said softly. "Is your father home? I need to speak with him." Lily glanced over her shoulder toward the kitchen. "Dad?" she called out, her voice uncertain. Jack emerged from the shadows of the hallway, his face a mix of surprise and apprehension. "Evelyn," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Please, come in." Mrs. Miller stepped inside, her presence filling the room with a quiet dignity. She settled onto their worn couch, placing the wooden box carefully on the coffee table. "Jack," she began, her hands folded in her lap, I've been holding on to something for far too long. Lily hovered near the doorway, watching as Mrs. Miller untied the ribbon with careful fingers. The box creaked open, revealing a collection of yellowed envelopes bound together with twine. Daniel wrote many letters during his last deployment, Mrs. Miller explained, her voice steady despite the weight of memory in her words. But this one, she pulled out a single envelope from the bottom of the stack. This one was meant for you, Jack. Jack's hands trembled as he accepted the letter. The paper felt delicate, like autumn leaves ready to crumble. His name was written in Daniel's familiar scrawl. For Jack, Falcon Harper, to be delivered if I don't make it home. I couldn't bring myself to give it to you after everything, Mrs. Miller admitted, but seeing what happened in the square, hearing those terrible accusations, she shook her head. It's time you had this. Jack sank into his armchair, the letter heavy in his hands. Lily moved closer, perching on the arm of his chair. The room fell silent, except for the soft rustle of paper, as Jack carefully opened the envelope. His eyes moved across the first lines and his breath caught. Dear Jack, he read aloud, his voice rough with emotion. If you're reading this, I didn't make it back, but brother, there are things you need to know. Jack's hands shook harder. Lily placed her hand on his shoulder, and he drew strength from her touch. I've seen how you carry the weight of every decision, every loss, Jack continued reading. But what I want you to remember is the lives you've saved, not the ones we lost. That night in Kandahar, when you led us through hell itself, you didn't just save our unit. You saved hundreds of civilians who would have been caught in the crossfire. Tears began to roll down Jack's cheeks. Mrs. Miller sat quietly, her own eyes glistening. You're the bravest man I've ever known, Falcon. Not because you're fearless, but because you push through your fear to do what's right. You taught me that real courage isn't about glory or medals. It's about putting others first, even when everything in you screams to run. Lily's grip on her father's shoulder tightened. Jack had to pause, taking a shuddering breath before continuing. If I don't make it, tell my family I had no greater brother than Falcon. Tell them that whatever happened, you did everything humanly possible to bring us all home. And Jack, stop carrying this burden alone. The weight of war isn't meant for one man's shoulders. The letter trembled in Jack's hands. You're a hero, brother. Not because you never feel fear, but because you show others how to face it with dignity and grace. Keep flying high, Falcon. Until we meet again. Your brother always, Daniel. Silence filled the room as the last words hung in the air. Jack pressed the letter to his chest, years of guilt and pain flowing out with his tears. Lily wrapped her arms around her father's shoulders, her own tears falling into his hair. Mrs. Miller stood and walked over to them, placing one hand on Jack's arm. Daniel never doubted you, Jack, not once. Through her tears, Lily suddenly straightened. Dad, she said, her voice trembling but determined, people need to hear this, the whole town. They need to know the truth. Jack looked up at his daughter, then at Mrs. Miller, who nodded encouragingly. The cafe, Lily continued. We should read it at the cafe. Let everyone hear Captain Miller's own words. Jack's hand tightened on the letter. Fear flickered across his face, the same fear Daniel had written about, the fear he'd learned to push through. He looked at his daughter's pleading eyes, then at Mrs. Miller's gentle smile. After a long moment, he nodded slowly. Okay, he whispered, his voice hoarse but growing stronger. Okay, Lily, tomorrow morning, at the cafe. Mrs. Miller squeezed his arm. Daniel would be proud, Jack. He always was. The letter lay in Jack's lap, its words a bridge between past and present, between guilt and healing. Tomorrow, those words would echo through Harper's coffee house, but tonight they had already begun their work in the quiet of this living room, where three hearts beat a little lighter with shared truth. The evening sun cast long shadows through Harper's coffee house windows as people filed in slowly, their hushed conversations filling the normally quiet space with an electric tension. Word had spread quickly through the small town like ripples across still water. Jack Harper would read Captain Miller's final letter tonight. The cafe buzzed with anticipation, every chair occupied, people standing shoulder to shoulder along the walls, some pressing close to the windows from outside. Veterans in pressed uniforms stood at attention near the wall of honor, their medals catching the fading light. Regular customers who'd known Jack only as their friendly barista, the man who remembered their coffee orders and asked about their families, mingled with soldiers who'd heard tales of Falcon whispered in training camps and barracks. Mrs. Miller sat in the front row, her grace and dignity touching everyone around her like a gentle presence. Her silver hair was perfectly styled, and she wore a simple black dress with her husband's service pin on the lapel. The coffee shop had transformed. What was usually Jack's quiet sanctuary now held the weight of an entire community's expectations. The familiar aroma of roasted beans mixed with the scent of autumn air drifting through the open door. Someone had dimmed the overhead lights, leaving only the warm glow of the table lamps and the soft illumination from the wall of honor. Lily worked her way through the crowd with a tray of coffee cups, offering them freely to anyone who wanted one. Her movements were careful, deliberate, but her eyes kept drifting to her father. She'd tied her dark hair back and wore the simple blue dress her mother had bought her years ago. Somehow, it felt right for tonight. Every few steps she'd pause to accept a gentle pat on the shoulder or a whispered word of encouragement from the townsfolk. Jack stood behind the counter, his fingers running over the envelope's worn edges. The letter felt heavier than paper should, weighted with years of truth and pain. His hands trembled slightly, but his jaw was set with determination. He'd changed into a clean flannel shirt. The blue one Sarah had always said brought out his eyes. The silver coin, his old call sign token, sat heavy in his pocket, its familiar weight both comforting and challenging. The room seemed to hold its breath. Conversations faded to whispers, then to silence. Even the coffee machine had been turned off, its usual gentle hum absent from the evening symphony. "Dad?" Lily touched his arm gently, her voice barely above a whisper. "Everyone's here." Jack nodded, drawing a deep breath that seemed to fill not just his lungs but his entire being. He moved slowly to stand before the wall of honor, its collection of photographs watching over the gathered crowd like silent guardians. Men and women in uniform, some young, some weathered by time and service, all united in their sacrifice. Lily stayed close, her presence giving him strength, her hand occasionally brushing his arm in quiet support. The floorboards creaked slightly under his feet. Someone coughed softly. A chair scraped against the wooden floor. These small sounds seemed magnified in the expectant hush. "Thank you all for coming," Jack began, his voice soft but carrying through the hushed room like a prayer. The words felt inadequate for the moment, but they were all he had. "This letter," he paused, holding up the envelope so everyone could see its yellowed edges and careful script. "This letter was written by Captain James Miller before his final mission." He cleared his throat, the sound echoing slightly in the packed space. "Before he gave his life for his country and his brothers in arms." With careful reverence, as if handling something sacred, Jack unfolded the pages. The paper rustled softly, and several people leaned forward, straining to hear every word. "My dearest Sarah," Jack read, his voice growing stronger with each syllable. "If you're reading this, I didn't make it home. There are things you need to know. Truths that must be told about that day, and about the man they call Falcon." The cafe fell silent, except for Jack's steady voice and the soft whisper of wind through the door. Even the street outside seemed quieter, as if the entire town was holding its breath. "Jack Harper is the bravest man I've ever known," Jack continued, his voice carrying Miller's words across the years like a bridge between past and present. "When our unit was pinned down by enemy fire, when bullets were flying and good men were falling, he never wavered. When others froze in fear, he led with courage. When others sought cover, he ran toward danger. The stories you'll hear about that mission, about how we lost good men, they won't tell you the whole truth." Jack paused, his eyes finding Mrs. Miller's across the crowded room. She sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, but her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. She nodded encouragingly, her lips moving in what might have been a silent prayer. "Falcon saved more lives that day than any of us can count," Jack read, his voice growing stronger, more certain. "He went back into fire 3 times to pull out wounded men. 3 times, Sarah. Each time we thought he wouldn't make it back, but he did. Carrying a soldier each time, his own blood mixing with theirs. When I was hit, when the shrapnel tore through my leg and I couldn't move, he carried me half a mile under heavy fire, refusing to leave me behind even when I begged him to save himself." A soft sob broke the silence. Near the back of the room, Sergeant Collins stood in the doorway, his broad frame filling the entrance. His face was twisted with emotion, years of pain and guilt written in every line. His uniform was wrinkled, as if he'd come straight from somewhere else. Somewhere he'd been wrestling with his demons. The room seemed to shift, everyone turning slightly to notice Collins, then turning back to Jack with renewed attention. Jack continued reading, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. The burden he carries isn't failure. It's the weight of impossible choices made in impossible moments. Sarah, if I don't make it home, please tell my family I had no greater brother than Falcon. Tell them he honored his duty until the very end. Tell them that when death came calling, he stood between it and every man under his command. Lily squeezed her father's arm, tears streaming down her face in silver tracks. The room was still. Every person hanging on each word as if their own salvation depended on them. The young soldiers stood straighter. The veterans nodded in recognition. The townspeople, the baker, the mechanic, the school teacher, all saw their quiet coffee shop owner in a new light. And if Jack Harper is reading this, Jack's voice cracked slightly, emotion finally breaking through his careful control. Stop blaming yourself, brother. You did everything right. You led with courage and compassion. You made the hard choices when no one else could. The guilt you carry isn't yours to bear. I made my choice that day, just as you made yours. That's what soldiers do. We choose to serve, to sacrifice, to stand for something bigger than ourselves. Collins pushed through the crowd, his steps unsteady, his breathing heavy. Jack, he called out, his voice rough with emotion and years of suppressed pain. I was wrong. God Almighty, I was so wrong. Jack lowered the letter carefully, meeting Collins's anguished gaze across the room. The big man's eyes were red-rimmed, his usual stern demeanor completely crumbled. I blamed you because... Collins swallowed hard, his voice breaking. Because it was easier than accepting that sometimes we just can't save everyone. Because blaming you meant I didn't have to face the truth about that day, about how scared I was, about how I froze when you didn't. He straightened his shoulders with visible effort. I've carried that anger for so long, twisting the truth until I believed my own lies. Captain Miller was right about you, he always was. You were the best of us. The cafe held its breath as Jack studied his former comrade. The two men stood separated by years of pain and misunderstanding, by accusations and hurt. Then, slowly, deliberately, Jack extended his hand across the divide. We all carry scars, John. It's time to let them heal. Collins grabbed Jack's hand with both of his own, pulling him into a fierce embrace that spoke of brotherhood restored and forgiveness freely given. The room erupted in applause, the sound washing away years of pain and misunderstanding like rain washing dust from windows. Lily watched through tears as her father's shoulders finally relaxed, as if setting down a heavy load he'd carried far too long. The veterans in the room stood straighter, many wiping their eyes with unashamed emotion. Mrs. Miller smiled through her tears, nodding in quiet approval, her husband's words finally finding their mark after all these years. When the applause faded, Jack moved to the wall of honor with reverent steps. He carefully pinned Miller's letter in the center, smoothing its edges with gentle fingers as if blessing it. From his pocket, he withdrew the worn coin that had been his constant companion for so many years, the token that had reminded him daily of his perceived failures. The word Falcon caught the light as he placed it beneath the letter, no longer a burden, but a badge of honor. This wall, Jack said, his voice clear and strong, carrying to every corner of the packed cafe, isn't about any one person. It's about all who served, all who sacrificed. It's about the bonds that hold us together, even when the world tries to tear us apart. He turned to face the crowd, standing tall for the first time in years, his shoulders back, his head high. It's about remembering that true courage isn't about being fearless. It's about choosing to do what's right, even when it costs us everything. It's about serving others, protecting what matters, and never giving up on the people who depend on us. He paused, looking out at the faces before him, young and old, civilian and military, all united in this moment of truth and redemption. Captain Miller taught me that we don't get to choose our battles, but we do get to choose how we fight them. Tonight, his words remind us all that the greatest victories aren't won on distant battlefields. They're won right here, in our communities, in our families, in the quiet moments when we choose love over fear, forgiveness over anger, hope over despair. Morning sunlight streamed through the cafe windows, painting golden squares across the wooden floors of Harper's Coffee House. The aroma of fresh coffee mingled with the sweet scent of baking muffins, and the familiar hum of conversation filled every corner. But today felt different, lighter somehow, as if a heavy cloud had finally lifted. Jack stood behind the counter, his movements easy and relaxed as he worked the espresso machine. The Wall of Honor now covered the entire back wall, a testament to service and sacrifice. Photos of young men and women in uniform smiled down at customers, their stories preserved in handwritten notes and carefully mounted medals. Captain Miller's letter held a place of honor at the center, Jack's falcon coin gleaming beneath it. "Order up," Jack called out, his voice strong and clear. "2 lattes for the Robinson sisters." Lily emerged from the kitchen, carrying a tray of warm scones. Her eyes sparkled as she watched her father work, noticing how he stood taller now, his shoulders no longer bearing the weight of hidden pain. "Dad," she said, bumping his hip playfully as she passed, "these are fresh out of the oven. Want to try one?" Jack grabbed a scone, taking an exaggerated bite. Perfect, just like your mom used to make." His words, once rare and careful when mentioning her mother, now came naturally, wrapped in warmth instead of sorrow. The morning rush brought its usual parade of familiar faces, but now each interaction carried new meaning. Mrs. Chen, who'd been coming in for her morning tea for years, reached across the counter to squeeze Jack's hand. "We're blessed to have you in our community, Mr. Harper." Jack shook his head modestly. "The blessing is mine, having neighbors like you." The bell above the door chimed, and the young soldiers from before entered, their boots polished and uniforms crisp. The leader of the group, Lieutenant Rogers, approached the counter with a respectful nod. "The usual?" "Gentlemen," Jack asked, already reaching for cups. "Yes, sir," Rogers replied, then added with a grin, "Falcon." Jack chuckled, no longer flinching at his old call sign. "Coming right up." As the soldiers waited for their orders, they gravitated toward the Wall of Honor, studying the faces and reading the stories. One young private stood transfixed before Captain Miller's letter, his eyes moving slowly across the words. Lily brought their drinks over, pride evident in her stance. "Dad's adding new photos every day," she told them. "People keep bringing them in." "It's important to remember," Jack said, joining them. "Not just the battles, but the everyday courage, the friendships, the sacrifices made by families back home." He gestured to the wall. "These are the real heroes." The soldiers snapped to attention, saluting sharply before heading out. Jack returned their salute, the movement now natural and unforced. Throughout the morning, people continued to drift in and out. Some came for coffee, others to share stories or add photos to the wall. Old Mr. Peterson, a Korean War veteran who rarely left his house, shuffled in with a weathered photograph in his trembling hands. "Got room for one more?" he asked, his voice quavering. Jack guided him to the wall, arms steady around the older man's shoulders. "There's always room for heroes, sir." Lily helped them mount the photo, listening as Mr. Peterson spoke about friends long gone. Her eyes welled up as the elderly veteran wiped away tears of his own. By late afternoon, the cafe had settled into its familiar rhythm, but with a new undercurrent of purpose. Regular customers lingered longer, sharing memories and connecting with others. The Wall of Honor had transformed the space into more than just a coffee shop. It had become a living memorial, a place of healing. "Dad," Lily said during a quiet moment, wrapping her arms around his waist. "I've never been prouder to be your daughter." Jack hugged her close, kissing the top of her head. "And I've never been more grateful for you, sweetheart. You helped me find my way back." As the sun began to set, they closed up together, moving through their usual routine with comfortable familiarity. Jack counted the register while Lily wiped down tables, their movements synchronized from years of practice. Outside, the town square glowed with warm lamplight. Stars began appearing in the darkening sky, twinkling like distant memories. Jack locked the cafe door, and Lily slipped her hand into his as they started their walk home. The evening air was cool and fresh, carrying the scent of autumn leaves. Their footsteps echoed softly on the sidewalk as they passed the familiar storefronts and houses that had watched Jack's journey from hidden pain to healing. Lily leaned against her father's shoulder as they walked, feeling the strength that had always been there, now unhidden. "Welcome home, Dad," she whispered. Jack smiled, his face peaceful in the gentle lamplight. The stars above seemed brighter somehow, as if reflecting the light that had returned to his heart. Together, father and daughter walked on, their shadows merging in the warm glow of the street lamps, two hearts beating in perfect understanding. Lily squeezed her father's hand, and Jack squeezed back, the simple gesture speaking volumes about love, forgiveness, and the power of truth to heal even the deepest wounds. The man who had hidden behind a coffee counter for so long now walked tall, finally at peace with both his past and his present. The town square embraced them in its peaceful evening quiet, a fitting end to a journey that had brought not just Jack, but an entire community, full circle. Here was a man redeemed, a daughter's faith restored, and a legacy of honor preserved not in silence, but in the sharing of truth and the healing power of love. But just as Jack finally found peace, fate was not finished with him. The next morning, an unmarked letter appeared on the doorstep of Harper's coffee house, addressed to Falcon. What truths does this new letter hold? And will Jack's journey of healing be tested once again? Click the next video to uncover what happens next. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a moment of this story, and comment below. What do you think is inside that letter? Sometimes the past doesn't just whisper, it knocks. Thank you truly for spending these moments with us today. Stories like this aren't just about characters on a page, they're about us, about the struggles and quiet courage we all carry. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Where are you watching from, and what part of Jack's story spoke most deeply to your heart? If you believe in stories of hope, redemption, and the power of truth, I'd be honored if you'd subscribe or follow along, because together we're building a community that values compassion and connection. Wherever you are tonight, know this: you are seen, you are valued, and your story matters too. Until next time, stay strong, stay kind, and keep the light of hope burning.